Welcome to the Be Amazing podcast, where fitness, wellness, and multifamily come together. I'm your host, Seal, fitness professional, gym designer, and community leader. I'll be bringing real conversations with industry leaders, game changers, and visionaries who inspire movement in every sense of the word. Now let's go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Be Amazing podcast. And today I am thrilled to have our guest. He is the Addy award-winning photographer, James Patrick. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, so let's just dive in a little bit and talk about who you are, like your background, because you have this amazing background. A lot of it is from the creative side, but you're also business, entrepreneur, all of those things. So kind of dive into that a little bit.
Well, and I think, so many of us, when we go to school for whatever profession we choose to do, for me, it was journalism at the time, but ended up in photography. We learned so much about the trade itself. Like I learned how to write articles, I learned how to take photos, but I didn't necessarily get taught how to get hired to write articles or how to get hired to take photos. And oftentimes when, you and we both have a connection to the health and wellness space. Oftentimes when I work with personal trainers or gym owners, they excel at working with their clients. They excel at helping people achieve amazing things and breaking through barriers and reaching goals that these clients never thought were possible, but no one ever taught them how to get those clients. And that was something that I found to be a little confusing. So, when you mentioned, yeah, I've done the entrepreneurial side, I feel like we all kind of have to do that, whether we want to or not, in order to do the work that we actually want to do. So right out of college, I was trying to build a career in photography, but I didn't really know a lot of professional photographers. So I didn't know how viable that was at the time. I couldn't really see clearly with that. So I took what I considered to be a safe job in marketing. And I'm glad I did, because in that job in marketing, I learned about client relationship management, about outbound marketing, about proactive versus reactive marketing, and how to build a sustainable portfolio of work so that when the time came that I was building my photo career on the side, I was I wouldn't say overly confident, but I was competent enough to know that I could generate leads and work for my photo business. So I left my marketing job, pursued photography full time, but I would say that I'm very curious. And as I was doing my photography business, I would have certain questions that would pop into my mind, like what would happen if I wrote a book, and what would happen if I had a podcast, or what would happen if I pulled together an event of people with similar interests. And so that's kind of what led me to do a lot of the ancillary things I worked on, from the conference I ran for a number of years, to the books I wrote, to the podcasts I launched, etc. So I think it was willing to be curious and at least see where that curiosity led me.
I find that really interesting because I think a lot of people are held back. Like they might be curious, but they're so afraid to take this step to do something. And when, just from us talking a little bit, and then even like when I was on your website and I watched your video, and you were like, you just said it again. What about if I did a podcast? I'll step out and do it. What if I do a book? Like, what if I write a book? What if I do this? Like, first of all, where does that come from, as far as like being able just to take the step and almost in a fearless way, not fear it? To me, it doesn't sound like you fear failing at all. Is that the case?
No. So I've been running my business for 20 years, and I would say I'm just as scared today as I was 20 years ago when I hadn't done anything. And I think it's important to recognize that, because it is easy when you're just starting out, or maybe you haven't achieved something that you thought you could have achieved, and you see others, especially through the lens of social media, who are sharing all their successes, and it's easy to see, okay, over 20 years, yeah, I've built a career as a photographer, or whatever I've done. But what you're not seeing is, the mistakes I made along the way, or the things that didn't work out, because I'm not really, I don't advertise those. No one advertises those.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you know, there are plenty of things that don't go well. There are plenty of things that have failed. Um, I learned early on what the cost of inaction was. So I'd rather take action and it not work out than not take action and have it guaranteed not to work out. And the example I'll give is I, when I was still in my marketing career, I had a great idea for a book. Um, it was a type of marketing that I had been working on for a couple years, and it was really doing well for my company and then in turn for my own career. And I thought, no one's really navigating this. I should write a book about this. I let me start writing some notes down. So I started a bit of a manuscript. But what happened is I got busy and I put the manuscript back up on a shelf. That's a euphemism. It was saved on a hard drive. But after a few months, maybe I open it up again. I'm like, oh, let me jot down a few more words into this Word doc. And you know, um, flash forward, it's about a year and a half or so. The book came out and it was a bestseller. Here's the catch, though. My name wasn't on it. And the reason my name wasn't on it is because I never finished it. My idea was still saved on my computer, like half done. I never published it. I eventually moved on. I figured, nah, this was not as important to me. So someone else at some point inevitably had the idea and they wrote the book and it became a bestseller. That's the cost of inaction. Okay. Um, so I learned from that. All right. I'd rather launch something and put it out, even if it doesn't work. And an example I'll give is in 2015, I had an idea for a conference. And he says, well, what would happen if I gathered together a bunch of health and wellness professionals to discuss the ins and outs of the health and wellness industry to see where we can go as a community? And so I created this concept of a conference, and it was supposed to happen in June of 2015. And I did some aggressive promotion. I got it out there. And the week of the conference, we had two signups. Two. That's it. Two. I had 10 speakers. I had five times as many speakers as I had people willing to pay to attend this damn thing. So we had to cancel it. Like, I mean, clearly I messed something up. Something didn't work. So we canceled it, refunded the two people with a giant mea culpa, and I reworked the idea. And then 3 months later, I relaunched it and we sold out the room. The room, was 55 people, but hey, that was five times as many speakers as we had. And it was as many as we can fit in our tiny room at the Holiday Inn in East Mesa. Um, and then the next year I tripled it and we had 150. And then the year after that, we had 300 and we grew it up to over 500 attendees. But it's important to remember that the first one did not work. We had to cancel it. So when we kind of skip over some of those missteps or failures, particularly when we're communicating how we got to where we go, I think we're doing others a disservice because they just see a sold out conference or a best-selling book or 800 covers, but they didn't see all the missteps we took along the way. So I think that is an important part of this timeline.
I would so agree with that. I can identify with you in the whole conference space because I've had the amazing weekend. We started out and have had moments with that along the way. I did my big one in 2021, and it hit like we felt like a very successful point. But there were so many, like you said, there's just so many things along the way that like so many tries, and like, you try it, it doesn't work. You try it, it doesn't work. And what I love what you said was that you kind of went back and I want to say reshaped it, or, looked at it through a different lens
Mhm.
and created something that was for a specific audience. Kind of how is that process for you for even what you do now, like, and encouraging somebody that maybe, whether it's a project, whether they're, launching something new, whether they're doing something entrepreneur, kind of give us a little bit of like what that process is like for you.
I'm of the belief that an imperfect launch will be infinitely better than the perfect launch that doesn't happen. I think what I see a lot of people do is they hold back on something until they think it's perfect and ready to put out there. But that only gets me to, a book that never gets published, right? And this idea, which I think is a misconception, that once we do something, it is done. It is static. When in reality, most of what we do lives in a very dynamic world. Look at a website, for example. Oh, I've been wanting to get my website up for a while. I just, I'm still working on it. Well, all right, hit publish and work on it while it's published. Like, no one's going to see an unpublished website, but someone could see a half done published website and still be drawn in enough to want to work with you. Um, a number of years ago, I was wanting to launch a new business, and I was falsely confident in this idea. And it was, we had so much success at this point with our fitness conference. I was like, well, let me just copy paste that over to the creative industry. And I was, and I believe that, all the experience and the clout and um, uh, all the upfront work I had done on the one end would just translate over to a completely new industry and a completely new vertical. The night before we went live, I was feeling a little saucy, and my wife it kind of asked me what was wrong, and we just got down to I was like, what if this doesn't work? Like, I've
Mhm.
put a lot of time into this, I put a lot of money into this. What if this does not work? Um, and she says, well, I guess you'll do something else. I said, oh yeah, huh? I guess I will. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. We lost money on it, and I closed it and shelved it, and I've been reworking it. I'm on 8 years of reworking it now, and I plan to launch it again later this year. It's going to work this year, and I know it's going to work this year because I know the work I needed to do to get it to work. Um, or I should say, I'm more confident that's going to work this year. But I wouldn't have known why it didn't work unless I put it out there, unless I tested it out and to see, okay, that's not what people wanted. And what I learned is I didn't have the right audience to launch this new vertical. And so I've spent years building that audience and nurturing that audience and building rapport and trust with that audience. So now when I do release something, I have an audience ready for it. I launched something that at the time I did not have an audience for. So that's just an example of, okay, we tried something, it didn't work. Well, why didn't it work? And let's examine that and let's unpack that. And that doesn't mean to say that it didn't hurt and I wasn't upset and it didn't suck. Yeah, it hurt and I was upset and it sucked. But I could also take a step back after I cry about it and look at it objectively to be like, okay, what about this wasn't working? I had alluded to a couple times that I had run a conference. We'd run a conference for 10 years. I ran that conference. But after 2020, the industry itself really shifted in regards to what consumer demand wanted from a conference and what they were willing to invest in and what they were not willing to invest in. So we had to adapt. Every year, our conference changed a bit. We couldn't just do the same conference every single year. We had to pay attention to what consumers and what our attendees were wanting every year. And that meant our last year we did was in 2024. That conference was wildly different than the one we did even 2 years prior to that. I look at my work as a photographer. When I first started over 20 years ago, how I worked and what I did and the deliverables I gave to clients was radically different from what I do now. I when I first started taking photos, it was right in the transition of photographers transitioning from shooting with film to shooting digitally. And there were lots of photographers who were protesting this very publicly, "Oh, real professionals only shoot film." But what happened? Client demand dictated that they wanted digital assets. So unless you were willing to learn to shoot digitally, you became irrelevant in the eyes of the marketplace. Same thing happened with social media. Photographers kind of put their foot in the ground and says, real clients, they're not going to want to find creatives on social media. It's more for kids. It's not a real marketplace. Well, consumers said we want to find the people we want to build relationships with, connect with, and eventually work with on these social platforms. And we saw the same thing in 2008 during that recession where photographers once again were standing at the edge of the world as a tidal wave of change is rolling on them, saying, oh, all these new photographers are entering the marketplace. They're lowering market value. They're giving away too many assets. They're delivering services they shouldn't be delivering, and it's devaluing the market. Not really. What consumers want is changing, and maybe just people who are newer to the industry are more willing to be adaptable to what consumers want moving forward. And that's why, a big concern in the creative industry right now is the impacts AI will have on creative
Mhm.
services. And I can't say I'm terribly concerned about it because it's just another technological advancement within our industry that will shift what we do or how we serve our clients. But as long as we are staying adept and willing to figure out what people want next, well, then there's always going to be a demand for some sort of service. But that service may evolve, and I'm okay with that. And I feel like people who are willing to be adaptable will be just fine.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that in the multifamily industry, which is a lot of who this audience is. Seeing that through leasing apartments. For me, even with fitness, how much it has evolved, how much technology plays a role, like having to adapt to all that. Also seeing like 5 years ago, or even I would probably go back even 6 years ago, when you went to rent an apartment and a fitness amenity was not like sought after. It was mainly like, oh, we have treadmills and climb mill and maybe some dumbbells and that's it. And now it's like, no, they're going for full gyms. And so the developers had to pivot, the management teams, the leasing, like everyone now knows that fitness is now a huge amenity for their apartment community. And so I'm now doing full gyms where that wasn't the case before. And so it's been interesting because you're right. Like we just have to be ready for change and just to kind of be able to pivot and roll with it and not be scared of it and embrace it. And I'm still a big believer, even though we're going to have, AI is changing things. There's some amazing tools that we can use and access, but also just the fact that like, not to be afraid of it, embrace it. I don't think that it's going to replace us completely as humans, at least in the next couple of years. But like, I think it's just being open. And I think that for me, well, that's what I'm gathering from you is I think because you are so open and so willing to take risks and willing to step out there and do things and being open to when things change and then you pivot with that, that says a lot about you as a person. And what would you say to someone right now? So we may have some people that are listening that may have a desire to either go after a different level in their career. They may want
Mhm.
to start an entrepreneur venture on as a side hustle. They may want to write a book. Like, what would you say to someone that may still have like that paralyzing fear, that thing that comes in sometimes and blocks because of how fast our world is changing and they may be struggling with that?
I mean, let's kind of unpack it in the sense of if we were to peel back the layers of what the fear actually is. The first level is, well, I'm afraid it might not work. All right, well, we've done things that don't work, so that's probably not the actual reason. Uh, you know, you peel back another layer. I think the thing that when I peeled back enough layers for myself, and I still struggle with this, is maybe people figure out I'm not actually that good, and I'll be embarrassed about that. And that gets sewed into a lot, even to this day. I had a project, it was maybe a year ago, and um, everything that it was a photo campaign, and everything that could have gone wrong with this project on set did go wrong. And I was really stressed. I had hair before the project, and for anyone watching, I clearly don't now. Um, I was like talking to my sister. I was like, I feel like I aged 10 years on this one trip to shoot this project. And it was nothing we did wrong. It was just all logistics that messed up the entire production of the project. And I thought my career was over. Legitimately, I'm like, it was such a high profile client, and this client is never going to hire me again. Their publicity company is never going to hire me again. This will get out about how bad this went. And even though none of it was within my control, I will be blamed and my career will be over. It was a nice 20 years. I made it work and the client was delighted and they ended up hiring us a bunch more after that. Uh, mm, so it nothing happened. Nothing happened. And that was kind of like an eye-opening thing where it was like I stressed. I didn't sleep the night before the project. I was up the entire night just stressed about how awful this was going to be. And this is after, doing what I do for 20 years. Um, that's why I'll harken back to that fear doesn't ever dissipate. It's what we do choose to do with it. Um, One of the deterrents people might have prior to doing something is they feel like they don't have enough experience or knowledge or credentials or education. And I want to put light on that because it's important to remember I had no idea how to be a photographer when I picked up a camera. Did not know. Okay. It was only by picking up a camera that I learned how to use a camera. It was only by telling people I was a photographer that I learned how to get people to hire me. I had never written a book before until I actually finished a book and wrote a book um, and learned how to market a book. I had never talked on a microphone before until I decided I should start a podcast. And it is, I think, important to recognize that uh, there's this great idiom of the worst 10,000 photos I've ever taken were the first 10,000 photos I took. My worst podcasts were my first podcast. Absolutely. Um, the worst event I ever hosted was the first event I ever hosted. A couple years ago, I opened up a production studio. I have never owned a production studio before, and I've made plenty of mistakes in owning this studio over the course of 3 years. But we're profitable now, and I'm very grateful for that. But we would never have learned to be profitable if we never opened the doors, if we never signed the lease, if we never came up with the business plan, if we never had the inspiration of even having this to kind of pull the timeline back. So it is understanding that, yeah, there are going to be things that don't go well. You are going to mess up. It is a guarantee. Sucking is kind of part of the process, and you can't get good at anything until you're not good at something and you kind of work through that.
What's the recovery process for you, or what do you feel like when there has been a failure or something that like didn't go right? How did you recover from that and have the confidence to be like, all right, move on next? Like, how did you get there? Like, what is it that you leaned into for that?
It's a really good question. And I think that exists probably on a spectrum based off how big the loss was. Um, I think there are certain things that I had to acknowledge it was okay to quit and understand why I was quitting something. And if I was quitting something because I was afraid of it, or if I was quitting it because it just wasn't working, or I just didn't want to do it. And I think that required a bit of time and thought. So, I'll go back to the aforementioned example of, trying to launch a new vertical. I want to say it was around 2018, 2019, that didn't work out. That stung quite a bit because I lost money on it, but it didn't deter me because after the sting, after I kind of examined it, I was like, okay, I just need to invest in building a new audience. And it took a couple years for me to be at a point where I'm like, okay, I've successfully built this audience. I feel confident relaunching this vertical now. Um, so, okay, that took a couple years. It wasn't something I quit, but it is something I definitely shelved for a number of years. And I wasn't sitting around waiting. I was working on other projects. Um, and then, with the conference, another example, it had changed so much over 10 years. After 10 years of doing it, I just was done with it. I was
Mhm.
energetically ready to, close that chapter. And so, we made the announcement at our 2024 event that, yeah, you've noticed we haven't opened up any pre-sale for next year, and that's because there's not going to be a next year. I feel like I've answered the question of what would happen if I brought together people to navigate parts of this industry together. I feel like I've answered that question, and I don't feel like there's any more I want to do with this, or there's any more benefit to us continuing to host this. Um, and I'm trying to think of an example of something. Uh, we, we've tried to work on a digital media agency for years, with very mixed results. And there are certain parts of it that we were able to create that was able to be profitable, and there are other elements of our agency that have not been profitable. And I've had to really look at that and be like, well, at some point, I'm going to have to make some decisions about, is this something we need to keep trying, or is this the best use of our time and our resources? And, we've had to end up closing things just because we're like, all right, this isn't working. It isn't working for us financially, or isn't working for us energetically or emotionally. Let's put our energy into something else. I launched a new business at the start of this year. Um, and, fortunately, it's been in profit thus far. Now, is it where I fantasized it would be? No.
Mhm.
I think we've all been misled, where someone wakes up and there's like $100,000 in their bank account the next day because their online business blew up overnight. No. And it's just a reminder of the work that needs to be done to get it to where I want it to be. Um, and, you know, at some part of me is like, okay, oh, that's such a bummer that, I didn't wake up to an overnight success. But I think after a few years, I'll have an overnight success. It'll just take a few years to get there.
This podcast is filmed and produced by Be Amazing Media. At Be Amazing Media, we provide video and photography services. We work with groups, we work with individuals, we work with corporate clients. It doesn't matter if it's headshots, if you're wanting to film a commercial to share your story of your business, or you want to bring us in and film an event. We're here for you. You could reach out to us at beamazing-media.com.
So that to me, like the whole part of you said it, the work that has to go into something, like there is that expectation because we live in such a world of like, instant, everything's instant. And but with that said too, when is it, and you kind of touched on it a little bit already, but like, is there a certain point that you let something go, you get to a place and you're like, I just need to let it go. Have you, in that part, have you ever struggled with that? Like you feel like you needed to hold on to it just a little longer? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
is there any specific one thing that you've done?
The conference comes to mind. Um, and the reason the conference comes to mind is it was such a just a pivotal anchor in our
Mhm.
entire business model. I When I started in the health and wellness space, um, and this doesn't, I don't say this coming from a place of ego. It's just looking at it from a pure market perspective. When I was campaigning my work as a photographer in the fitness space, not a lot of other people were. And it really was to my benefit because when it came to shooting fitness and athletic portraiture, I didn't really have competition for a very long time. And because I had made so many great relationships with so many of the media outlets, and I'm shooting covers for Oxygen and Shape and Muscle and Fitness and Iron Man, my work was very sought out by people who wanted to appear in those publications. And when I uh, really then brought that into the conference, and all of a sudden you can attend my conference and you will meet the editor of Oxygen there. You will meet the editor of Strong there. You will meet the editor of Women's Health and Fitness there, because I brought them all out. That became a very attractive thing. And I was actually just talking to my editor about this the other day, where, in 2019, where we had like 500 people there, and I got up on stage to do the keynote, I looked out and there was 500 people who paid to be there at my event that I created. Um, and this was my brand that they wanted to be a part of. And that was it was a very powerful thing, but it also was it was centered in a lot of ego too. And so when the fitness industry really shifted, and when events really shifted, especially going into 2020, when we weren't able to host an in-person event, and then my connection to the fitness industry started to change over 2020 and 2021. It led us to then change the direction of the conference, and then we shifted the name of not only the direction of the conference, we changed the name of the conference, and then we changed the format of the conference, and I kept holding on to it, trying to make it into something that I thought, one, I wasn't going to sell anything that I didn't believe in, but something that also I felt I wanted to be a part of. And I thought, if I don't have this conference, I will lose that clout. I will lose that marketing anchor. I will be, the conference. We didn't do the conference to make money. We did the conference as a lead generating tool. Um, and I would lose that, and then people wouldn't know who I was anymore. And
Mhm.
there's a little bit of ego and vanity in that, to go from being on stage in front of 500 people to saying, we're going to get rid of this thing. Um, and now I'm in a completely new industry. I wouldn't say I'm really in the health and fitness space anymore as a creative. I'm more into the commercial, general commercial field. And all of a sudden, I'm starting over as a
Mhm.
creative and as an artist, and I'm not known, and I don't have clout, and I don't have that cachet that I had when I was a really big fish in a smaller pond. Um, and so that's been interesting and eye-opening. And it's been a refresher in the sense of, well, what did we have to do? This came up, and I was hosting a marketing roundtable with photographers last night, and this came up last night. I got to do it again. I got to do what I did back in 2008 when I decided to be proactive in the fitness space. I got to do that again, only in a completely new industry. So I already know how to do the work. I just have to do it again. And once I realized that I already know what to do and I just have to do it again, that was a relief. And it was like, okay, it's okay to let this thing go,
Mhm.
to not have this be part of the identity, as much as there was an emotional attachment to it that I was justifying by saying, well, we need this for the business.
Mhm.
But truth be told, we probably could have ended the conference a few years earlier than we actually did.
Yeah, there's so much to that with holding on to things. I think I've felt that way in parts of my life, even with fitness. I'm in fitness. I've been in fitness 25 years. I was in the competitive side, I was in the coaching side, the training space, all of those things. And it was probably last year when I had to let go of that piece of my identity. And gosh, what a like it's you wonder, you're like, how, like, if I let go of that, you feel like you're losing part of yourself.
Hmm.
And but I finally did let it go. And when I did, it's like like you said, you have some relief because you've been holding on to something that isn't like people say isn't serving you anymore, isn't doing anything for you anymore. And then all of a sudden, like, other doors open, other opportunities come about, like things start to shift. And it's not that that all the work that you did prior doesn't matter. You get to take that with you into the next thing. And same thing, it's like, here we go again, gonna have to work just as hard as I did before, but I'm a little bit smarter about what I'm doing. And I'm equipped and I'm ready. And so this whole thing because I just feel like it's a very, for me, it's very personal. You talking about the identity thing. And I run into more people doing that, especially in the industries that I'm in, and when they're changing careers, or they've been doing this one thing forever and then they go to something else, and it is starting over, and it does humble you a good bit, to be like, okay, I'll start showing it up all the networking events again. I'll start, working the trade shows. I'll start making the calls. Like, so it's
Yep.
not an easy thing, but it's nice to know and nice to hear, like, you talking about it from a very authentic place. Thank you for sharing that.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. It's and I think you used the right word. I think it is humbling. But I also believe hard work is good work. And it feels nice to get excited about the work I'm doing
Mhm.
every day. And if we're in something, I feel like there's this scale of discomfort. So when I was working in marketing, my first few years in marketing, I genuinely loved my job. And I felt like I was very good at my job and I had really good numbers. Um, but at some point along the way, I'm not enjoying it as much, right? We say, it's like, oh, it's out of alignment. Um, but I got to a point where I was essentially working two full-time jobs. I had my career in marketing, but I was working as a photographer full-time, like every night, every weekend. I was burning all my sick time and all my vacation time just trying to build my photo business. Um, my last review, uh, at my marketing job, it was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. My boss drove down to my office to do my review, and my numbers were fine. We were in the recession, so they were fine, all factors considered. And he's like, yeah, we're good to keep going. You know, and it got to that point of the session of this annual review, which I've been there 7 years. This was my seventh review, where he says, well, this is the point where we normally read you the anonymous quotes from the rest of the office leadership about your performance. I was like, okay. He says, but it was a weird year. And, he's trying to cover something up. And I'm like, well, what are the quotes? He says, well, they were mostly good. And I was like, well, I've never had a bad quote before. Like what are some of the other office leaders saying? He's like, I was just catching them on bad days. Don't worry about it. I'm like, I'm just curious to hear. He's like, okay. Well, one person said that you've become disgruntled and difficult to work with. And I was like, yeah, that's probably accurate. That's probably fair. And I was like, what else? And he says, really, don't worry about this one. I caught him on a bad day. It had nothing to do with you. I was like, I'm just curious what it says. He says, all right. And he said, I've lost all faith in James's ability as our lead marketer. I was like, oh, okay. Well, I'd like to quit now. I think I'm done. And my boss, to his credit, took a big sigh, leaned back in his chair. He says, I was wondering when you would do that, and I'm surprised it took you that long. And I was like, oh, that he was very supportive. It took me hearing about how disgruntled I was, and how the rest of my office leadership felt I wasn't showing up, for me to be like, yeah, I shouldn't show up. This isn't for me anymore. This isn't what I want. And it took that level of discomfort, that level of, me being unsatisfied or unhappy in what I was doing, to finally quit and be like, you know what, I'm just going to do this other thing. Um, and I got to tell you, I probably thought I was going to quit half a dozen times before that. Today's the day I'm going to go in and turn in my notice. But it took, me hearing those statements. And had he not read me those statements, maybe I would have stayed another year or two, and just been more unhappy. So that's what I think about when I think about that level of dissatisfaction before we actually are willing to step into something that doesn't seem as bad, which, despite being as scary, maybe won't make us as miserable.
It's so true. You'll just stay in something. Like, I've done that, where you just stay in something, and you keep telling yourself, it's just a hard place, or I can get through this. I can get past it. and then eventually the door shuts, whether whether you do it yourself or somebody does it for you, and then you're like, okay, that was if I'm already having those feelings inside, I need to pay attention, I need to listen. uh so with all of this, what do you lean into for like mental health or taking care of yourself, like when, especially in this time that you're talking about where, things are changing and shifting, like what is important for you, or what is it that you do to take care of yourself?
A tremendous amount of therapy. A crippling amount of therapy. I mean, everyone needs to pay attention to, particularly when it comes to mental health, to what they feel is appropriate for them. I feel like for a long time I was really curious about trying to habit hack and trying to find what others were doing in their routines, and what's the best morning routine, and how do I optimize my output. And it, at some point it just kind of felt dishonest. I
Mhm.
didn't really believe what people were doing. Like, I mean, what did we just see? Like a couple weeks ago, there was that fitness influencer who went viral for his bullshit morning routine. Um, but I've been hearing and seeing that stuff for years, and so none of
Mhm.
it was a surprise. Like I've been hearing, people talk about, what was I was at a dinner with I'm gonna blank on his name. He was on that MTV show Ridiculousness.
I don't know.
Um, Rob something. He was like a skater, and MTV gave him.
Oh, okay. I do know you're talking about, but I don't remember his last name.
Yeah. So, and at that same dinner, I think Tom and Lisa Bill you were at, and they were talking about their morning habits. And I was just like, wait, you get up at what time? I'm sorry, what? And it was like, and I tried it and I was like, this sucks so much. Like, I hate this. I don't want to get up at 4 in the morning. Like, I really like sleep. Um, so I think for me, what it tended to be, outside of therapy, was just figuring out what keeps me happy.
Mhm.
And that changes over time. And also, it changes different. Like I have 2 kids now. Like the idea of me, spending an hour in the morning journaling and then meditating, like, okay, when is that happening? Um, my son is now, my oldest son now gets up before me and opens my door and wakes me up. Like that's where I'm at now. Like that is my season. Um, so I do have to just be conscious of my time, and there are certain things that I've just learned work for me. Like if I don't have some movement every day, I will get cranky. Like, so I just like
Mhm.
to move every day. And I don't have the time to go to the gym for a couple hours a day anymore. That is not my reality. But well, I can move for 30 minutes a day. That I
Mhm.
can do that. That could work. Reading makes me happy. So I like to read every day. Uh, and I don't have this elaborate routine that I used to have years ago because there's not the time for it. And even if there was a time for it, I don't know if it's what I would want right now. But right now, if I'm reading every day and if I can move every day, I'm pretty happy. And that kind of keeps me focused. But I'll start to notice if I start to skip things, like, sleep is another thing. If I'm not going to bed early, uh, you know, after a few days, I'm going to notice my productivity shifts. I'm going to
Mhm.
notice my mood shifts. If I skip a few days of working out, I'm going to notice my attention to detail is going to start to shift. So there are certain things that, to some degree, I don't like the word non-negotiable, but to some degree, just became too important not to have. Um, because I've just noticed what happens if I get lax on them.
I feel like you've said a lot, and just with what you're saying now, because I feel like it takes a lot of pressure off. I think people feel under pressure, like you said, with like what we see on social, especially like workout routines and meditation and all these things, that life is already crazy enough and you're trying to just get through the day. And then if you have families and you have, you're an entrepreneur, or you work in a business, or you work for a company, like everybody's, I feel like, is their schedules are full. And then there's this pressure and performance pressure. And so I feel like you have done an amazing job of just like almost like a relief in that sense of like, okay, I don't have to try to do all the things, like listen to myself, listen to my body, listen to what I need. And then two, with that, the same thing with you have applied that same thing to business, like the pressure of perfection there. And you're a photographer. So like, and you're in media, and and I feel like that's a lot, that what we see is like everybody's seeing like this perfect side, and there again, pressure to perform, pressure to show up. If you put something out in the world, make sure it's perfect. So this entire conversation, I feel like has so much value in it, talking about bouncing back from a setback, but also like you really, really have talked about part of things in our life is to take the pressure off and live and find those things that bring you joy, and find the things that, you get excited about getting up every day.
I'm glad you brought up perfection, because I want to hit that. Like, let's use a magazine cover as an example. So like, oh, by the way, this was the project that I thought was going to end my career. And it turned out fine. This looks great.
Wow.
Okay, so you see this photo and you're like, okay, she looks glamorous, this is great. Okay, so this is the definition of perfection, right?
Mhm.
But what about the fact that I had to take around 1,000 images that day, probably close to 2,000? There's one photo here, which meant that 999 photos got thrown away. That right there. 99.9% of what I did got thrown away to get one image. Okay. So there was a lot that had to go into a single image. So when we look at something like that, I think a magazine cover is just a nice analogy for this. Of, this symbolizes this attainment of perfection. How much we had to do, how much we had to fail to get to that, to get even close to that. Most of the work I take never gets seen. Well over 99% never gets published, never gets seen, never goes anywhere. Okay. So that right there, it's like we have to do a lot just to get something that we feel is viable in the marketplace. Not every photo gets published, not everything is going to work. In fact, in what I do as a photographer, most of it doesn't. Most of it never goes anywhere.
That's so fascinating. I don't think we realize that. I think everybody thinks that you took like 1,000 pictures and they're all like perfect.
They weren't perfect enough to get published. That's the thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, again, it's just going back to that, like relief, like you can breathe, everyone, like you can breathe, like take the pressure off and embrace life where it's at, and, step out and try things and do things, and do it with to me, what you're saying is like, just take the step and do it. And then, you're going to, either way you win, whether you win or you fail, you're going to learn from your failures, which will eventually help you win, or you'll win out the gate. So that's just such a different take on it than I think that we're used to seeing. Is there anything else for you as far as like that you want to leave with this audience, just kind of as we wrap up our conversation?
No, I used to, this is where I used to always have like a great opt-in. I'm like, if you want my free
Right.
guide on the 4 steps on how to get onto your own magazine cover, you know, I'll just leave with an encouragement that, they are willing to sort through imperfection to find something that resonates. And, I'll repeat what I said earlier. An imperfect launch will be infinitely better than a perfect launch, because an imperfect launch provides us feedback. And the role we have as feedback is to understand what our audience actually wants from us. And there's no way we can hypothesize that as accurately as we can once something is in the marketplace and our audience is actually telling us by their dollars what they like and what they don't like, that's how we get to figure out our next step. Is our audience is just going to tell us.
Yeah, that's so on point. And I'm even in the middle of like, I've had my podcast since 2020, well, 2020. And did it with marketing. We were marketing for an event and have had to pivot several times. I fell in love with podcasting because I get to meet people like yourself. I'm fascinated, curiosity, with stories and how people end up doing what they're doing. And I'm even myself now in that process of pivoting again. And this is going to be like season 3 is going to be a really interesting season because we're going to see where things go with this. But thank you for sharing all that you have shared today. Because for me, it's a takeaway. Like it's a takeaway with like not being fearful, taking the step out and just like roll with it. So I really appreciate you being on. Where can they connect with you?
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you having me on. My website's jamespatrick.com. My Instagram handle's @jpatrickphoto. That's probably the easiest.
Well, this has been so much fun, like talking to you. Because I told you earlier, I was like, I remember seeing you because from my fitness days and very familiar with you. Probably said I was strong, friends with him. And then other people that Lori Harder, I saw Chris on your website. Like we have quite a few friends in the industry that have crossed paths, but this was such a joy to like have this conversation with you and excited for where things are going for you and what's next. And this has just been awesome. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you so much, and good luck on season 3. And like it clearly, I've done a number of these, and it is refreshing when a host is actually invested in their audience, and that is very transparent with you. And that right there, I think, is the mark of like a show I enjoy listening to, is when the host is genuinely excited about the topics that they're unpacking, and it's very clear when that's not the case. And so my hat's off to you for creating something that you enjoy, you love to talk about, and that just will resonate through to your audience.
Well, I really appreciate that. This has been
Absolutely.
so much fun.
Thank you so much for listening to the Be Amazing podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please send it to someone who inspires you so they can feel amazing too. If you want to help us reach new listeners, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Don't forget, you can find the video versions of our episodes on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram at the Be Amazing Podcast or DM me at Seal Smart. I'll see you in the next episode.